Welcome back to DWP 2022. We are on episode number 9, where we revisit the modernized, don't westernize paradigm for Brand Afrika. And the reason we are bringing this to a second shot, maybe even a third, is that we need to go back to have a much more global perspective on this issue. So in the last few episodes, especially the last one, we were basically trying to show that the misconception that Africa and Africans did not contribute much to the global economy is false. In fact, Africans, especially African slaves in the southern part of the United States back in the 17th, 18th century, were central to actually creating the agricultural revolution in the South, which then led to the industrial revolution in the north of the United States, creating all the key ingredients that made the United States the global economic superpower, having the most established financial services institutions, the biggest banks, insurance, and the lot. So when Jeff Pierce, as I quoted him last time, and he basically says their worst, meaning Western civilization, will only begin to understand Africa when it realizes that when it talks to Africa, it's not talking to its child, it's actually talking to its mother, the proverbial mother who taught the West a whole bunch of things, including the work ethic, as well as the humanity element of life. So modernize, don't westernize is still the mantra we have today, so that as Brand Afrika enhances, we've said it should exude the motherly side of Africa to the world. It should exude workmanship of the highest order and back to its strongest institutions of highly functional families and communities. So Brand Afrika is increasingly going to be the new breath of fresh air for the rest of the world. And we therefore ready to go into the facts when we tackle the modernized on westernize again today. So my name is Mandi Rukuni. I authored this book, Being African, which I'm recommending to you. You stand a chance of winning a copy of this book in the DWP competitions. But I wrote this book primarily because we Africans often confuse westernization with modernization. So this book goes through what it takes for us to modernize Africa using our heritage rather than westernizing it. So Hunu, Botu, Ubuntu, Udugu is what this book is about. I recommend it to you highly, and those who want the practical side of how to succeed using heritage values, you can go to the small handbook of African Pathways to Success. Look forward to you participating in the competition. Thank you.
Stand a chance to win a copy of the book, Being African, or the booklet, African Pathways to Success, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni, and leaving a comment on one of our recent videos. You can also like our Facebook page and comment on a recent post. If you're on Instagram, follow the profile Prof Mandi Rukuni and leave a comment on a recent post as well. A random participant will be chosen at the end of the month and will be contacted and given the book.
Fact number one is that let's just face it, this challenge of shifting from a rural agrarian society to an urban industrial society is a challenge for all civilizations. So it's not only Africa. Even in the Western Hemisphere, as they were going through those transformations, it impacted on every aspect of their lives, family, community, the whole social fabric. The urban industrial society is a whole change in all the key institutions. So we don't have to make it too personal for Africa. What makes it difficult for Africa is that the process of structural transformation from a predominantly rural agrarian society to a predominantly urban industrial society is unorthodox. The Western world had the orthodox approach because they had all the time and resources. They could make all the mistakes, abuse the environment, use slaves. So they had a really good start ahead of everybody else. But the colonized countries, which includes almost all of Africa, are not undergoing the same orthodox transformation. It's actually the opposite. Because orthodox-wise, as you had the agricultural revolution in the south of the US, it pushes cities grow bigger because of manufacturing. So actually, cities grow because of economic growth rate. In Africa, it's the opposite. Cities grow because of poverty and lack of growth. So you have urbanization without jobs. Real orthodox structural transformation is urbanization with jobs. So as a matter of fact, I will do a little bit of a lecture kind of approach where I differentiate orthodox structural transformation from unorthodox, so that we can then understand where the cultural elements come through. So as I've already said, with orthodox structural transformation, urbanization goes along with more and more manufacturing jobs. In an unorthodox structural transformation, there's urbanization, but there are no jobs. In terms of the economy itself, in orthodox structural transformation, you have one big economy. The agricultural revolution happening in the rural areas is the same market as the urban. They are sharing the resources, they are sharing the labor market, they are sharing the finished products. It's one big market. In Africa, it's two separate markets. The market created by the colonials, which was a small proportion of the population, which enjoys both the farming, feeding into the factories and the cities. It's a smaller proportion. The rest of the people are actually excluded from industrial processes. The third distinction is that with structural transformation that's more orthodox, it goes along immediately with high levels of economic growth rate, high levels of employment, and also the difference between the wealthy and the poor narrows. Where we have an orthodox structural transformation is the opposite. Economic growth rates stagnate, and then you find that unemployment never comes down. In fact, it continues to go up. Then the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, So, in summary, orthodox transformation leads to a singular economy, whereas unorthodox structural transformation, mostly in the formerly colonized nations, is a dual economy, which gets more and more hardwired. So this is the thing. And the conclusion there, which then becomes important for our topic, is with orthodox structural transformation, a lot of the challenges, such as unemployment, high levels of inflation, and stuff like that, they self-correct through good economic governance. In unorthodox economies like we have in Africa, even with good economic management, even with zero corruption, the structure of the economy is that bulk of the population is already excluded from manufacturing it's not part of the industrial society, so it won't make a difference to the long-term economic growth. So having explained those differences, it therefore follows that we need to compare what happened with modernity in Western civilization so that we can now understand why Africans would have slightly different challenges. It's the same category of challenges, but it all emanates from this difference between orthodox and unorthodoxy that I explained. So let's examine, first of all, Western modernity and how it happened and how it impacted on societal values. So when you look at the literature, you'd say it actually happened in 3 phases. The first phase is what I described as the initial phase, where massive rural agricultural transformation pushes and creates a new industrial society. A lot of good value at the beginning. They enjoyed the benefits of industrialization, the increase in the products, increases in income, all that is enjoyable to some extent. Of course, there's always challenges, but what then happens is a major change in some of the social elements. And before you even get there, the industrialization process itself, the modernization, creates new systems, and there's less and less reliance on the traditional family. There's less and less reliance on the traditional community. And now things are bureaucratized. And what happens now in the urban settings, whether it's the suburbs or whatever, they start expecting more and more from government and local authorities. And the experience with this urbanization in the Western world was, it then leads to more and more discontent between your ratepayers, your urban dwellers, and their government and local government. Those systems become a bit more impersonal as things go. So the new expectations as urbanization grows, expectations of good service delivery start to be a problem. At the second stage, therefore, in the Western modernity, you then find that as the demands on government and local government become more and more difficult to actually fulfill, this strains these relationships to a point where now a new array of problems start arising. And even in their own sense, that's when they start missing some of the old values that disappeared as they were urbanizing. And you find this falls in several categories. First is the bureaucracy itself, just to slice up 3 or 4 of those so that you understand in practical terms what we mean. Because the bureaucratic processes of life increase, there is this impersonal side of bureaucracy. People feel a little bit distanced. There's always, you're almost like dealing with machines, not people anymore. And it doesn't only happen with services, even on the job. You're in the factory 10 hours a day, 8 hours, 14 hours, night shifts. You're just part of a machine. And what happens is now there is a disenchantment that comes in with that lifestyle. There's some kind of distancing from some of the key elements of rural agrarian life. There's a loss of sacredness in many things, and the rural agrarian life is full of much more physical understanding, all different facets of life and culture, and that is lost. It becomes a problem. Then, of course, there is this whole secularization that happens, and individuals are isolated, a sense of identity is lost, sense of meaning sometimes is lost, because then you're not that close to your family anymore, and religion takes a new industrial meaning. So these are elements And we can actually go through more because that also impacts on the African side. The commodification of almost every aspect of life is another reason I find in the literature why even in the Western world people start getting disenchanted with urbanization as it impacts on social values. So there's this element of everything translates to money. And I know in Africa, youngsters are already beginning to talk about it. Even relationship, young people trying to have relationships, they're dating boy and girl, it can easily turn into a monetary kind of exchange issue. There are many similar issues we are experiencing in Africa, they experience. The only difference is, as I said, we are poorer, we are in a less orthodox industrial society. So all this kind of contextualization of social practices and beliefs, they no longer have context. So even if you continue believing in some of them, but once you are in an urban industrial setting, they start losing sense. But if there is one single one that they also felt in the West that is bigger in Africa is the issue of individualism. Individualism at its worst is not only breeding selfishness, but it also breeds a new type of stress in people because of that loss of cohesive togetherness with clan, family, etc. And finally, I think that when you go full circle, and in Western civilization, when they get to the third phase, you always see a new rise in some form of nationalism, but people are finding new ways of who we are. And that often translates nationalism very easily into politics and different types of kind of geopolitical tensions that arise. So divisions across geopolitical regions, major doctrines, you see it flowing into other regions. That's why world wars sometimes happen, disagree. So there is an aggregate aspect of this modernity which makes people try and look for new levels of identity and redefining the national identity. And I'm saying for Africa, therefore, if this is what the Western world went through, we are now in double trouble because those same elements of losing a number of key elements in the social, cultural aspects of life, the impersonal nature of urban industrial society, the diminishing role of family and so on. I want to come back to that now and what it means for Africa in the analysis section. See you shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to the analysis section. So what I'd like to do in this analysis section is to actually go back to the three phases of modernity I put across as experienced by by Western civilization. So I got this in the literature. I found that the whole thing is to do with an early stage where there is excitement in the massive changes and benefits that come from moving from a rural agrarian to all these new finished industrial products, the new services, and so on. And then in the second phase, disenchantment that comes from loss of a lot of the traditional values around family and community, and even delivery of services. The third phase, and I must point out that this third phase I'm explaining where it all eventually washes through in a soul search of national identity. It comes in all forms of ways. You know, the Germans wanted to run the world, so did the British. Today, the Americans want to be the greatest again, and then the Russians are in there, the Chinese, the Indians are, you know, it's as you go through those, that last phase in the Western world, they are now at between 95 to 98% of the population is now in urban industrial society. Let me repeat it. Because they are now practically everyone is urban industrial, you know, in terms of location. That search for new national identities and new social values is all encapsulated in industrial processes. Okay. So you can now imagine, Africa, we are 60% still rural, agrarian. In other parts, it differs from region to region and country to country. But the most urbanized countries would probably still be around 40, 50%. And we still have parts of Africa where you have 70% or more people still rural, agrarian. You can imagine one part of society is living this urban industrial type of life. But in those urban centers where they are supposed to be experiencing the benefits of industrialization, those benefits are not coming through because those economies are not manufacturing anything. The urban area is just a service center. These are the administrative and service centers, manufacturing very little. So you can see why the disenchantment is even quicker than in the former colonizers' areas, because you have these Africans seated in these cities. They get what are supposed to be systems of an industrial society, an education for an industrialized society, a health system for an industrialized society, a banking system for an industrialized country. But no, we are only getting that education because that's what's being delivered as expected of an industrial society. But it's not there. You're actually being prepared for some other society that does not exist yet. So the bulk of the population, meanwhile, is rural agrarian and being told over and over again through the education system, even in the rural areas, that says you ought to be experiencing a Western style lifestyle, you know. And at the same time, the systems that were working for them, which are more traditional, the family structure that was providing not just a base to educate and prepare citizens for life, but also the social security system that ensures no one goes destitute, that is being left and broken down. In the cities, it always breaks down anyway. It's just that in Africa, it breaks down so fast. What you have street kids with no families, you know, people who are homeless, and even some of the dwellings are nondescript because they are neither African village or a Western urban area. They are just, we call them informal housing or some squatter areas. This represents the contradictions that Africans are facing, and somehow, instead of analyzing and dealing with these and how we should continue to use some of our traditional values and institutions until we get also fully industrialized some stage down the road. No, we are busy just analyzing the symptoms, arguing about the symptoms. People in my type of work, researchers, academics, philosophers, thinkers, we only analyze the events and the symptoms. We are not analyzing the systems and the mental models that created all this. So at the end of the day, that's why it becomes important, as I said before, as Africans, to go back to the foundations. Brand Afrika has to be founded on modernizing and not westernizing, because the foundation is still African. The family structure, no matter how broken, it's still very African. If you try to fast track it to a nuclear family type operation in a continent where actually you don't have much of an industrial manufacturing society, you create new gaps where the new economy and the new governmental systems cannot fulfill. Then we get upset with our town councils, our cities, poor service delivery, our governments. Well, these are not economic towns. These are just administrative and service centers, and commercial centers to sell imported products. So I am arguing modernize, don't westernize, across the board, because shifting from a rural agrarian society to an urban industrial society has to be a conscious process. It's a mindset. It's not just building factories. It's an understanding by governments, by scholars, by our spiritual leaders that is a transformation of every aspect of society. It's just staying in the urban areas. The entire legal system changes. The entire family structure changes. The financial systems change. The way you produce changes. So the political system will have to change. And so does the legal system. And take the legal, just as the last parting shot on this one. When you're a rural, agrarian, traditional society, the legal system is entirely based on how we live together, how we work together, how we play together, how we think together. It's all around that. The legal traditions come out of the way of life of people. There's no legal tradition in Africa which just comes out of thin air, out of textbooks. Okay. But now, enter a colonial system. The legal system in the Western Hemisphere at some point understood traditional values. But by the time they colonized Africa, their legal system has changed. And what's the main thing there? They are now an economic, commercial, industrial society. So the legal system is pregnant with commercial law. It's what they focus on. When they come to Africa and colonize, what they leave behind in the curriculum, what they leave behind in the court system, what they leave behind in the processes of parliament, is mostly to deal with an industrialized society. Okay, so modernize, don't westernize. And as we take and keep some of the Western systems, for some are really worth keeping, but let's Africanize them. So modernize also means borrow intelligently and Africanize the idea. So 55 countries in Africa, as I say, not one is a successful, industrialized, manufacturing, high-income country. Not one out of 55. So what that means is not a mistake. 0 out of 55 is not a mistake. It's because there are major structural faults in the economic structural transformation processes. We are not yet set to have the bulk of the population participating in manufacturing and industrial processes. The literature calls, we are in a middle income trap. We can't get out until you change the structure so that everywhere people to start participating in mass production of goods and services, mass processing them and mass consuming their own finished and improved products. I suppose those same challenges that they experienced in the United States are just, not just the United States, I mean the Western civilization. They're just exacerbated now for Africans. And just to repeat some of them, the impersonal aspects of life, you lose that human touch. The too many hierarchies in the bureaucratic system, something that should be easily dealt with. You have to go to 5 different offices. Loss of this connection between the spiritual and the physical world. As you get more urbanized, those are separated. The physical world is somewhere else. The spiritual world is in the church. It's just loss of identity. And the promised benefits of urbanization are absolutely so far away that, and as I say, and I'm not just trying to be controversial, you can go any African country, including the most industrialized country, South Africa. 90% of the urban councils cannot deliver the services. So people will toy and will demonstrate against poor service delivery. I have no problem with that. But go deeper, don't just analyze these events and trends. Analyze the systems. Go even higher and look at, so exactly what were these towns created for? Here you find they were service centers. They're never commercial centers, industrial centers. They don't manufacture anything. So what do you expect all of a sudden the citizens of that little urban setting, the ratepayers, are going to be able to have sufficient rate-paying capacity to have a wealthy city council which can deliver all the expected services, health, education, roads, power, water, services which in a rural agrarian society would have been dealt with by the community. So Westernization, to me, is a destination. The idea of wanting to be Western, wanting to dress like a Western, wanting to eat the same type of food, and so on, to me, it's just a destination, not a process. The process is Africanization. That's why I'm pushing this modernize, don't westernize Africa. It's because almost all the time, attempting to do it the Western way translates to a copy and paste. It's just a destination. It has to be like this, as opposed to it is a process which leads us to a desired destination. So we defined the idea of Westernization contextually so that we can place the African setting in terms of, therefore, how do we, as we live with these Western ideas in our societies in Africa, how do we continue to contextualize and then borrow intelligently what's worth borrowing, and then Africanize the things that may not be African, but once we're through with them, they become African solutions. So, in conclusion, I would say in terms of the analysis, the practical aspects for Africans in the modernization agenda is, first of all, whatever we take, we must adapt our dress to the local taste. We must style, whether it's our fashion, it's our buildings. We must style everything to suit not just African tastes, but how we live and how we use the rooms. Because a lot of Western buildings may look beautiful on paper, but the way Africans actually use space is different from the way Europeans use space. Let me give you an example. In most African settings I've been, you don't enter a house through the so-called front door. You go in through the kitchen. You see, I'm sure you've seen this. So you go home, the front door, that's supposed to be the front door, is locked. You go around through the back. You see, now, but it's because we have designed the house and the architecture is designed to look like a Western building, but the usage is completely different. I'm just giving you an example of what I mean by Africanizing a Western idea. Make it African. You may want to keep the same style of architecture, but change it for local taste. Sometimes you take a completely African idea, like an African hut or whatever it is, you then translate it to contemporary tastes and style. That too is modernization. It's not staying in the past, it's translating, continue to take the same values and tastes and translating them into new products and services. Another way of modernizing rather than westernizing is to also go back to some of the disadvantages I was mentioning of industrialization, where things become impersonal and they lose freshness because they're too bureaucratic. So we could actually run our social systems and our service delivery systems completely differently from the Western style, because what happens today is, are we talking business or we are not? If we're talking business, therefore we should talk like Westerners do. You know, you become completely different people. I mean, I've had people come to my property or business, and they'll say, according to city regulations, blah blah, there's this, the regulations say this and that. I mean, they are not even aware that fine, there may still be, there could actually be regulations of the city, but some of them are out of date. They don't even know they're out of date. They just want to apply a regulation just because somebody says maybe that's the only way we're going to get money out of the system. They have to pay this or pay that. If you go back to African freshness, you always start from the beginning. Where is this all coming from? What does it mean? How can we work together? How does it help you? How does it help me? Don't start with the regulation. Start with how it helps you and how it helps me. So restore some of that high quality service delivery that you always saw in African culture. It should shine through everything we do. We should not just copy the impersonal aspects that were brought in by Western urbanization. So as I say, any idea from anywhere, take it. Even change 5-10% to make it more African. By the time you are done with it, it must be unmistakably African. That's what I'm talking about. So that's really what I wanted to say in the analysis, and I will see you shortly in the conclusion. Thank you. Welcome back to the conclusion. So I've got a number of key points here. I'll just try and sum quickly. In Africa, I see the breakdown in marriages, families are disintegrating, communities are decaying. In once were vibrant families and communities. And this is happening in a way that says to me, we are blind to the fact that we are rushing to behave like an urban industrial society. We're at a stage where we are still very far from that. Our institutions are not ready for an urban industrial society because there's no urban industrialization. There's no manufacturing in these towns. But we watch these families fall apart. These communities fail to do basic things like protect themselves, protect the environments, and anyone can cut trees now, do whatever they want, silt the rivers. So that's the first thing I wanted to push, because Brand Afrika should also reflect our stage of development and continue to encourage the traditional wisdom around how a family coheres and functions, how a community becomes self-reliant and so on. The second is that a lot of the negative effects in total are greater than the positive effects of urban industrialization. So we are now seeing more and more people feeling alienated from society. You know, lack of rootedness, people, loss of strong bonds, and the disappearance of common values. So what being African is understanding humanity at the deepest level. And it's being eroded. And people, I strongly believe it's because we're not analyzing our situation. We're expecting an to problems which we should still solve with what we have. Let's first preserve what we have, and that is African institutions, African values, and African systems, which we should not be side-blinded by the attractiveness of technologies, which may, in the end, as I say, bring some quick, nice benefits like has been experienced in the Western world, only to find down the road that you are now confronted with so many losses at the social and cultural level. So, as we suffer in Africa, we're suffering, but there's no collective understanding of why we're suffering like this. There's no collective understanding that in terms of processes of structural transformation, none of the 55 African countries really should be behaving like it was an urban industrial society. And that as long as we are all caught up in this middle income trap, meaning we can only then start moving rapidly towards urban industrial societies after we've fixed how an average African woman and man in the village out there in the rural areas becomes part and parcel of a production system of raw materials that is directly connected to manufacturing and value adding within close vicinity, because they have to also benefit from the jobs, even the final products that are manufactured to be consumed as close to the original source as possible. But that is how, even starting with the food system, a culture can modernize right from there. Produce raw materials of your staple foods, whether you're eating grains such as maize or sorghum, the millets or tubers, or it's matoke if you're in Uganda, or cassava, plantain, and then all the vegetables and relishes. If those are mass-produced in a way that understands that processing them massively is going to lead to products that are consumed within 25, 50-kilometer zones, now you have the seeds of industrialization right there. People enjoying improvement in production and processing of what they eat, and they also have more monies in their pockets. So when this family institution changes, it's on the basis of a growing functional economy. When the community systems change, it's based on growing a functional economy. When urban cities grow and other agglomerations, they are capable of having systems and processes that are fully financed because the economy is growing. So I'm just linking the brand to the process of transforming a society and how that impacts on social values. So I think we need that mindset shift across the board. As I've said before, I think some of the Asian tigers have done a much greater job, especially on the economic elements. Some are doing better on also anticipating the social and cultural impacts. But the unorthodoxy of our transformation is what I want to leave on the table as to why we shouldn't hasten just to Westernize. We should hasten to Africanize everything so that it's relevant to today's situation and that it takes our people along with it. So once again, as we say in this program, whoever controls Africa runs this world. We also say, we know that the more Africa controls its own resources, the more Africa controls who we are, the more Africa controls how we are seen, not just by ourselves, by the rest of the world. When we control the overall brand that says this is Africa, this is a place that exudes a new freshness in everything we do, everything we produce, and everything we will share with the rest of the world. Then we are on our way. We are already on our way to be the largest economy, as I've always said, by 2060. But now we'll get there in better style. And let me leave you with that and continue to nurture Brand Afrika as as the mother brand for the world, the mothering brand, the one that exudes a future that has more humanity in it, a breath of fresh air for the rest of the world. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.